Your Honor, my husband is mentally unstable. He's been having episodes for months.
What are you doing, Claire?
Mrs. Caldwell, are you alleging your husband is a danger?
He talks to himself. He records things that never happened. He's paranoid. I'm scared for him.
The first time my wife called me mentally unstable, it wasn't in private. It was under oath. "I'm afraid for my children," Vanessa told the judge, her voice trembling just enough to feel believable. "He's unpredictable, paranoid. He imagines things that aren't there." I sat at the defense table, hands folded, staring at the wood grain, counting the lines so I wouldn't look at her. Unpredictable, paranoid. For 11 years, I had woken up at 5:30 a.m., packed school lunches, paid every mortgage installment on time, and coached Little League on Saturdays. I fixed leaky faucets and filed taxes early. I didn't drink. I didn't gamble. I didn't even raise my voice. But that morning in a Sacramento family courtroom, I was being painted as a man who couldn't be trusted alone with his own children. Vanessa dabbed at her eyes. "He installed cameras around the house without telling me. He records conversations. He thinks I'm plotting against him." The courtroom murmured softly. Her attorney stepped forward. "Your Honor, we're requesting supervised visitation until Mr. Caldwell undergoes psychiatric evaluation." Psychiatric evaluation. I felt my jaw tighten. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked at me. "Mr. Caldwell, do you wish to respond?" I stood slowly. "No, Your Honor." Vanessa blinked, almost surprised. I sat back down. "Before we continue, tell me where you're listening from, White. If this story pulls you in, a like really helps. And if you stay for truth that doesn't come easy, subscribe. Now, let's go back to how this began. 3 months earlier, I came home early from work. That alone should have been my first mistake. I'm a structural engineer. Projects run long, deadlines don't move. But that Tuesday, a client canceled last minute. I drove home thinking I'd surprise the kids, maybe pick up pizza. The house was quiet, too quiet. Vanessa's SUV was in the driveway. The curtains were drawn in the middle of the afternoon. I remember noticing that. Inside, I heard laughter upstairs. Not our kids' laughter, lower, intimate. I didn't charge up the stairs. I didn't shout. I walked back outside, and I opened the Ring app on my phone. We'd installed security cameras after a break-in across the street last year. Vanessa had insisted, safety first, she'd said. What she forgot was that I handled the technical setup. I pulled up the interior hallway camera. There she was, Vanessa, and behind her, stepping out of our bedroom, was Dr. Evan Pierce, our marriage counselor. I stared at the screen for a long time, long enough to feel something inside me turn cold and quiet. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I backed up the footage. Then I started noticing patterns, her late therapy sessions, her sudden insistence that I was emotionally distant, the way she'd begun suggesting, casually at first, that I seemed stressed, forgetful. "You've been under pressure," she'd say softly. "Maybe you should talk to someone." Looking back, it was careful, strategic. 2 weeks after that afternoon, she told me she wanted a separation. "I think you need help, Daniel," she said across our kitchen island. "You scare me sometimes." I almost laughed. Scare her? "I found something," she continued, sliding a folder toward me. Inside were printed screenshots of text messages, messages I had never sent, threats, accusations, wild claims that she was cheating. My name was at the top of the screen. "I think you're losing touch with reality," she whispered. That was the moment I understood. Someone had spoofed my number. Someone had planted evidence, and the only person with access to both my phone and our home network was sitting across from me, pretending to be afraid. I didn't shout. I didn't deny it. I said something that made her blink. "Okay." She filed for divorce the next morning.
The petition included requests for full custody on grounds of emotional instability. She cited documented paranoia. She included statements from Dr. Pierce about my concerning behavior. I hired an attorney, a good one, Ruth Gallagher, quiet, methodical. When I showed her the original hallway footage, she didn't react. She just asked, "Do you have more?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Don't use it yet." Vanessa escalated quickly. She requested emergency custody, claiming I'd been surveilling her obsessively. She admitted under oath that I'd installed cameras without consent. That part wasn't entirely false, but what she didn't mention was that she'd signed the installation paperwork herself. What she didn't mention was the timing. Ruth leaned over during a recess. "They're building a narrative," she whispered. "If the judge believes you're unstable, everything else becomes irrelevant." I watched Vanessa laugh quietly with her attorney across the courtroom. She looked relaxed, confident, like someone who believed she had already won. And maybe she thought she had, because 2 days before the custody hearing, I received a notice. Court-ordered psychiatric evaluation, mandatory. My employer was notified. My project access was temporarily suspended. 11 years of reputation began to tilt. That night, I sat alone in my car outside the house I was no longer allowed to enter. I opened my laptop and I watched the footage again. Not just the hallway clip, all of it, every angle, every timestamp, because Vanessa had accused me of being paranoid. But paranoia implies imagination. What I had was data, and buried inside that data was something she didn't know existed, a secondary server, installed automatically when I upgraded our system last year. It backed up everything, including audio. I clicked on a file dated 3 weeks before she filed for divorce. The camera in the upstairs hallway had captured more than movement. It captured voices, Vanessa's voice and Dr. Pierce's. "Once the judge orders evaluation, it's over," Evan said calmly. "No one questions mental health accusations in custody cases." Vanessa laughed. "What if he fights it?" Evan replied. "He won't. He never does." I sat there in the dark, listening to my wife plan the destruction of my credibility, not in anger, in strategy. I closed the laptop slowly. The custody hearing was 4 days away. Vanessa thought she was 1 step ahead. She had no idea what was about to play in that courtroom.
Vanessa didn't cry when the hearing ended. She gathered her purse with slow, deliberate movements, like someone folding laundry instead of dismantling a life. Her attorney leaned close, whispering something that made her nod once. Calm, controlled, almost confident. The judge's temporary order echoed in my ears. Psychiatric evaluation pending. Supervised visitation with the children until further notice. Supervised. As if I were dangerous. As if 11 years of bedtime stories and science fair projects meant nothing compared to a trembling voice under oath. I stepped outside the Sacramento courthouse into the harsh afternoon light. The sky was painfully blue. People were laughing on the steps. A couple argued about parking. Life uninterrupted. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Mr. Caldwell?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes?" "This is Dr. Helena Moore. I've been assigned to conduct your psychiatric evaluation." Assigned. Like a case file. We scheduled the appointment for Thursday morning. When I ended the call, I realized my hands were steady. Too steady. Before we continue, tell me where you're listening from, White. If this story pulls you in, a like really helps. And if you stay for truth that doesn't come easy, subscribe. Now let's go back to how this began. The first mistake I made wasn't installing cameras. It was assuming honesty was enough. 3 months before the courtroom, before the word unstable followed my name like a shadow, I came home early from work. I'm a structural engineer. Precision is my comfort zone. Bridges either hold or they don't. Steel either bends within tolerance or it fails. That Tuesday, a client postponed a site inspection. I drove home thinking I'd surprise the kids. Instead, I surprised myself. Vanessa's SUV was in the driveway, curtains drawn, middle of the afternoon. Inside, the house was too quiet. Then I heard it. Laughter. Upstairs. Not our children's. Lower. Intimate. I didn't storm upstairs. I didn't yell. I walked back outside, and I opened the Ring app. We'd installed cameras after a break-in across the street last year. Vanessa had insisted. Safety first, she'd said. What she didn't realize was that I handled the technical setup. Every angle, every access point. The interior hallway camera showed our bedroom door slightly open. I watched. Vanessa stepped out first, smoothing her hair. Behind her was Dr. Evan Pierce, our marriage counselor. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, long enough for something inside me to cool instead of burn. I didn't confront her that night. I made dinner, asked the kids about school, kissed her on the cheek, and then, after everyone slept, I replayed the footage. Twice. That's when I noticed patterns. Her sudden insistence that I was emotionally distant, the extra therapy sessions I wasn't invited to, the way Dr. Pierce began emailing me separately about stress indicators. Subtle seeds. 2 weeks later, Vanessa asked if I'd consider seeing a specialist. For anxiety, she said gently, you've been forgetful lately. Forgetful? I pay our mortgage 2 months early. I file taxes in January. I've never missed a parent-teacher conference. But she had examples ready. You forgot to pick up milk. You seemed paranoid about the cameras. You've been withdrawn. Withdrawn. I remember looking at her and realizing something unsettling. She wasn't improvising. She was building a narrative. Back in the present, 2 days after court, I sat across from Dr. Helena Moore in her office. Neutral walls, framed diplomas, a ticking clock that felt louder than necessary. Mr. Caldwell, she said kindly, I'm here to evaluate your mental state objectively. Objectively. She asked about childhood, stress levels, marriage conflicts. I answered everything calmly. When she asked about the cameras, I didn't flinch. Yes, I installed them. Why? For security. Your wife claims you monitor her obsessively. I met her eyes. I monitor patterns, I said, not people. She made a note. Then she leaned forward slightly. Your wife says you've accused her of infidelity without evidence. That was the moment. The thin edge between defending myself and sounding defensive. I haven't accused her, I said carefully. I've documented. Her pen paused. Documented what? I exhaled slowly. I'd prefer to show you. That night, after the kids were asleep at Vanessa's mother's house, because supervised visitation had already begun, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt different. Not empty. Occupied by absence. I opened my laptop. I didn't just have hallway footage. I had metadata, timestamps, login records, therapy billing discrepancies. Dr. Pierce had billed insurance for joint sessions on days I never attended. Insurance fraud. Vanessa's messages to him weren't romantic at first. They were strategic. He's getting suspicious. We need documentation. If we push for evaluation, it'll shift custody. Shift custody. I leaned back in my chair. They weren't just having an affair. They were building a case. The next morning, my attorney called. We need to tread carefully, she said. Judges take mental health allegations seriously. I know. If you retaliate aggressively, it reinforces her claim. I won't. There was a pause. Ethan, she said, is there anything you haven't told me? I looked at the ceiling. Yes. That afternoon, Vanessa texted, "How are you holding up?" As if she cared. I typed, "Fine." She responded almost immediately. I never wanted this to get ugly. I stared at the screen. Neither did I. But ugly had already been scheduled. Thursday, I returned to Dr. Moore's office. This time, I brought a flash drive. I understand discretion, I told her, but I also understand evidence. She hesitated. Then she accepted it. We watched the hallway footage together, silently. Then the billing statements. Then the email threads. Her expression didn't change dramatically, but it shifted, subtly, from evaluation to reassessment. She stopped the video. Did your wife know you had access to this? Yes. And you didn't confront her? No. Why? Because I was measuring twice. I didn't say that. I just said, because accusations without timing become noise. She studied me for a long moment. You understand, she said slowly, that presenting this in court changes things significantly. I do. Are you prepared for escalation? Escalation. Affair exposure. Professional misconduct. Insurance investigation. Custody battle turning nuclear. I thought about my children. I thought about the word unstable echoing in a courtroom. Yes. 2 days later, my attorney filed a motion. Supplemental evidence submission. Vanessa's lawyer responded within hours, aggressively. They accused me of manipulating footage, of creating digital fabrications, of deepfakes. Deepfakes. The irony almost made me laugh. That night, I received an email from Dr. Evan Pierce. Subject line, "We need to talk." I didn't open it immediately. I just stared at it. And then my phone buzzed. Private number. I answered. "Ethan," a voice said quietly. "You're making a mistake." My pulse slowed instead of racing. "What mistake?" I asked. A pause. Then, "You don't understand how far this goes." And the line went dead. I stood in the dark living room, phone still in my hand. Far. How far? Far enough to call me unstable under oath. Far enough to manipulate custody. Far enough to threaten. I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street. Every house calm. Every window glowing softly. Ordinary. But something beneath the surface had shifted. And whatever they thought I didn't understand, I was about to.
Dr. Pierce didn't call again that night. He didn't need to. The threat wasn't in what he said, it was in what he implied. You don't understand how far this goes. I stood in the dark living room long after the call ended, staring at my reflection in the window. I looked the same face, same steady posture, same man who packed lunches and coached Little League. But somewhere in the system surrounding me, a story had already been written, and I was the villain. The next morning, I forwarded the voicemail transcript and email to my attorney. She called within minutes. "Do not respond," she said immediately, "and do not engage." I wasn't planning to. Good, because this just escalated from custody manipulation to possible witness intimidation. The word hung between us. Intimidation. "That helps us," she added. "It helps the case," I corrected. She was quiet for a second. "Yes," she said softly, "it helps the case." 3 days later, we were back in court. Temporary orders hearing. Vanessa walked in wearing soft blue, minimal makeup, eyes slightly red like she hadn't slept. Her performance was subtle now, controlled vulnerability. Dr. Pierce sat 2 rows behind her. He didn't look at me. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Counsel," she said, nodding to my attorney, "you have additional evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor." My attorney stood calmly. "We'd like to submit surveillance footage, billing discrepancies, and correspondence that directly contradict claims of delusion." Vanessa's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection! This is retaliatory character assassination." The judge held up a hand. "Let's see the footage." The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the monitor flickered on. The hallway camera appeared, timestamp visible. Vanessa exiting the bedroom. Then Dr. Pierce. No audio, no drama, just movement, real. Vanessa's breath caught audibly behind me. Her attorney whispered something urgently. The judge leaned forward. "Is that you, Mrs. Caldwell?" Vanessa swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." "And Dr. Pierce?" A pause. "Yes." Her lawyer stepped in quickly. "This proves nothing inappropriate." My attorney didn't react. "Correct," she said evenly, "which is why we're also submitting billing statements showing joint therapy sessions charged on days Mr. Caldwell was not present." A ripple of murmurs moved through the courtroom. The judge's expression shifted. She turned toward Dr. Moore, who had been called to observe. "Dr. Moore, you conducted an independent evaluation?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Your findings?" Dr. Moore stood calmly. "Mr. Caldwell presents as psychologically stable, no indicators of paranoia, delusion, or instability. In fact, his restraint under significant emotional stress is notable." Restraint. The word landed softly. Vanessa's lawyer tried one last angle. Stress responses can be masked. Dr. Moore didn't flinch. Not consistently, and not this coherently. The judge leaned back. For the first time, I saw something in her expression that wasn't neutrality. It was clarity. The temporary order was amended that afternoon. Psychiatric evaluation requirement lifted. Supervised visitation removed. Shared custody reinstated pending final hearing. Vanessa didn't look at me as we exited the courtroom. Dr. Pierce avoided everyone. But as I reached the courthouse doors, I felt it. Eyes on me. I turned. Pierce stood across the hall. He wasn't angry. He wasn't embarrassed. He looked calculating. And for the first time, I realized something unsettling. This wasn't just about custody. It never had been. That evening, I picked up the kids from Vanessa's mother's house. They ran into my arms like nothing had happened, because to them, nothing had. Children don't see courtrooms. They see routines, safety, familiar voices. As I buckled them into the car, my son asked casually, "Dad, are you still going to the doctor?" I froze. "What doctor?" "The one Mom says checks your brain." My grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. What exactly did Mom say? That sometimes when people are sick in the head, they don't know it. I swallowed. How long has she been saying that? He shrugged. A while. A while. This hadn't started 3 months ago. It had started long before. Planting seeds, building narrative, quietly, at home, with the children. That night, after they fell asleep, I opened my laptop again. Not to review footage, to review timelines. Therapy began 18 months ago. Vanessa insisted on switching counselors. Dr. Pierce entered the picture. Within weeks, subtle language changed. You seem tense. You're overanalyzing. You're disconnected. Then the suggestions. Maybe we should document his episodes. Episodes. I leaned back. There had never been episodes. There had been disagreements, normal ones. But somewhere along the line, conflict became diagnosis, and diagnosis became leverage. At 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Unknown number again. I answered without hesitation. "You should have settled," a voice said quietly. "Vanessa." "You're not using your real number," I replied. A pause. "You embarrassed me." "No," I said evenly. "You did that yourself." Her voice hardened. "You think this is over?" I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure. There was a faint laugh on the line. "You still don't understand," she said softly. "You never did." The call ended. I stood there in the dim kitchen light, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Never did. Understand what? The affair? The manipulation? Or something bigger? I walked to the hallway where the camera still hung discreetly near the ceiling. It blinked red, recording, documenting, witnessing. But suddenly, I wondered, what if I hadn't been the only one recording? The first time I suspected there was more, it wasn't because of Vanessa. It was because of money. 2 days after the amended custody order, my bank flagged an attempted login from an unfamiliar device, not unusual during divorce proceedings. What caught my attention was the location. Not Sacramento, not even California. Denver. I stared at the notification longer than necessary. I didn't know anyone in Denver, but Dr. Pierce had mentioned once, casually during a session, that he'd trained in Colorado. At the time, it meant nothing. Now it felt like a thread, and I'd learned the hard way not to ignore threads. I called my attorney first thing the next morning. "Could this be connected?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Financially? Yes. You think Pierce accessed your accounts?" "I think someone tried." "And you think Vanessa gave him access?" "I think someone's preparing for something." She exhaled slowly. "Then we get ahead of it." Within hours, she had a forensic accountant looped in. I changed every password, enabled biometric locks, froze non-essential accounts. It felt paranoid, except it wasn't paranoia when someone had already tried to paint you unstable. It was survival. 3 days later, the forensic report came back. The attempted login hadn't been random. It was through an old joint budgeting app Vanessa and I used during therapy, the one Dr. Pierce had encouraged us to adopt for transparency. Transparency. The login attempt had used her old credentials, but routed through a VPN. Denver. My attorney didn't speculate. She didn't need to. "File a motion to subpoena Pierce's financial records," she said flatly. "On what grounds?" "Conflict of interest, potential collusion." The word felt heavy. Collusion. Not affair, not emotional betrayal. Strategic, intentional. The subpoena request didn't go unnoticed. Pierce's legal counsel responded within 48 hours. Aggressive, defensive. They claimed harassment, retaliation, but they also slipped. In their response was a timeline that listed the date Vanessa and Pierce began personal involvement. It was dated 8 months earlier. 8 months, not 3, not after I discovered the footage, before therapy ended, before custody discussions, before she first mentioned concerns about my mental state. I felt something inside me shift. This wasn't a reaction to exposure. This had been premeditated. The final custody hearing loomed 2 weeks away. Vanessa had stopped contacting me directly. All communication filtered through attorneys, polished, controlled, but beneath it tension hummed like a wire stretched too tight. Then the accountant called. "Mr. Caldwell," he said carefully, "there's something you need to see." He sent over a spreadsheet. Transactions, small at first, consulting fees, personal development workshops, mental wellness seminars, all billed through Pierce's LLC, all paid from an account Vanessa had opened 6 months ago, an account funded from our joint savings she had quietly transferred before filing. The total wasn't devastating, but it wasn't insignificant. $42,000. My jaw tightened. "She was paying him," I murmured. "Looks that way." "For what?" The accountant didn't answer. He didn't need to. We filed an emergency motion. Financial misconduct, misuse of marital funds, undisclosed transactions. Vanessa's attorney tried to frame it as personal therapeutic services, but the judge wasn't buying it anymore. Not after the footage, not after the billing discrepancies, and certainly not after the timeline. During the hearing, the judge asked Vanessa directly, "Did you use marital funds to compensate Dr. Pierce for services outside the scope of licensed therapy?" Vanessa hesitated, just a fraction too long. "Yes." "For what purpose?" Silence. Then, strategic consultation. The courtroom went still. Strategic, not emotional support, not counseling, strategy. The judge's pen paused mid-note. Clarify. Vanessa inhaled. To ensure custody outcomes that protected my children. The phrasing was deliberate, but the implication was unmistakable. Protected them. From me. Pierce was called to testify. He looked different now, less composed, less confident. Under oath, he admitted to advising Vanessa on narrative framing. Narrative framing. How to present behaviors, how to interpret reactions, how to document patterns. He insisted it wasn't manipulation, it was preparation. For what? The judge asked. For litigation. The word landed like a dropped glass. Litigation. Before she filed, before I knew, they had been preparing, building a case, constructing instability, quietly. My attorney didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Dr. Pierce, she said evenly, are you aware that advising a client to construct behavioral narratives for custody leverage while engaged in a romantic relationship constitutes ethical violation? Pierce swallowed. I disagree with that characterization. That wasn't the question. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence did it for him. The judge recessed early that day. I stepped into the hallway, heart pounding but face steady. Vanessa stood near the window. For the first time in months, she looked tired. Not defeated, just exposed. You went too far, she said quietly. I went too far? I repeated. You tried to humiliate me. She flinched. I was protecting them. From what? She didn't answer, because there was no answer that didn't sound absurd now. That night I sat in the dark living room again. Same house, same walls, different air. The camera still blinked red in the hallway, but now I understood something I hadn't before. They hadn't expected me to stay calm. They expected anger, outbursts, desperation. They expected me to react, because reaction could be reframed, documented, used. But restraint dismantled narrative, and that's what terrified them. The final hearing was set for Friday. Full custody determination, financial division, ethical review referral. I tucked my kids into bed Thursday night with steady hands. My daughter looked up at me. Are we okay now? I brushed her hair back gently. We're getting there. She nodded like that was enough, and maybe it was. But as I turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, my phone vibrated again. Unknown number. Different area code this time. Colorado. I answered, heavy breathing on the other end. Then a voice, low, male. You should have taken the deal. The line went dead. I stared at the dark screen. The deal? There had been a deal? Or had I missed it? Because suddenly I realized something chilling. What if this was never about custody at all?
Friday morning, the courtroom felt colder than it had any right to be. Not tense, not dramatic, just cold. Vanessa sat at the opposite table, hands folded, posture perfect. Dr. Pierce sat 2 seats behind her with his attorney. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He already knew what I knew, or thought I knew. My attorney leaned close. The ethics board opened an inquiry at dawn, she whispered. That call last night? I recorded it. Her eyes sharpened. Good. The bailiff called us to order. This was it. Custody, asset division, and something else, something none of us had planned for. Vanessa's attorney opened with a softer tone this time. No psychiatric allegations, no instability claims. Instead, a pivot. Your Honor, he began, while my client acknowledges errors in judgment regarding professional boundaries, her intentions were always to secure stability for her children. Stability, the word again. The judge didn't interrupt. Mr. Caldwell's surveillance activities, regardless of outcome, created an environment of distrust, he continued. We maintain that joint custody with structured oversight remains the safest option. Structured oversight, supervised access,
polite phrases for limitation. My attorney stood slowly. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "this case has never been about safety. It has been about control." She turned slightly toward Pierce. "We have financial records showing that Dr. Pierce was compensated with marital funds to assist in litigation strategy before any filing occurred." She handed the judge a binder. "We also have testimony admitting to narrative framing intended to influence custody outcomes." She paused. "And finally, we have an audio recording from last night." Vanessa's head snapped toward me. Pierce went still. The judge gestured. "Play it." The courtroom filled with the sound of breathing. Then the voice. "You should have taken the deal." Silence. Then my own voice. "What deal?" A pause. "The one where you signed joint custody and dropped the ethics complaint. Clean exit. No damage." The recording ended. You could feel the air change. The judge looked at Pierce. "Is that your voice?" Pierce didn't answer immediately. His attorney leaned toward him urgently. "Yes," Pierce said finally. The single word detonated quietly. "And what deal were you referring to?" the judge asked. Pierce swallowed. "A proposed settlement. Through proper legal channels?" "No." "Through intimidation?" Silence. The judge's pen stopped moving. Vanessa's composure fractured first. She turned toward Pierce, whispering harshly. He didn't look at her. He looked at the table, at his hands, at anything but the judge. My attorney didn't raise her voice. She simply said, "Your Honor, this confirms coordinated misconduct, an attempt to manipulate both narrative and outcome." The judge leaned back. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "This court takes custody matters with the utmost seriousness. Attempts to engineer psychological allegations, misuse marital funds, and engage in extrajudicial pressure will not be tolerated." He turned toward Vanessa. "Mrs. Caldwell, did you authorize Dr. Pierce to contact your husband regarding this deal?" Her lips parted, closed, opened again. "Yes." The word barely escaped. My chest tightened, not in rage, in recognition. This had never been fear for the children. It had been fear of losing control. The judge's ruling came slowly, deliberately. Primary physical custody awarded to me. Vanessa granted structured visitation pending completion of co-parenting counseling. Independent counseling, court approved. Dr. Pierce referred to the State Ethics Board with recommendation for license suspension pending investigation. Financial restitution ordered for misused marital funds. No supervised visitation, no psychiatric evaluation, no instability finding, just facts, on record, permanent. Vanessa didn't cry. She didn't yell. She didn't collapse. She sat there, absorbing the reality of something she had never believed possible, that her narrative could fail, that her strategy could backfire. As we stood, she looked at me, not with hatred, not with love, with something closer to disbelief. "You could have just agreed," she said quietly. "To what?" I asked. "To shared control." There it was, control. Not partnership, not parenting, control. I shook my head gently. "You don't get to manufacture a villain when you're losing." She looked away first. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with muted conversations. Reporters hadn't shown. There was no spectacle, just consequences. Pierce passed me without speaking. He looked smaller, less certain. For the first time since therapy began, I felt nothing toward him. No anger, no triumph, just clarity. Vanessa lingered near the elevator. "You really think this makes you the hero?" she asked. "I don't need to be the hero. I just needed to not be the monster you invented." The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. They closed. And just like that, the war ended not with an explosion, but with exposure. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my kids. No cameras, no hidden narratives, just dinner. My son poked at his broccoli. "Are we staying here?" he asked. "Yes." "For good?" "For now." He nodded. My daughter leaned against my arm. "You're not crazy," she said matter-of-factly. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "No," I said softly. "I'm not." Weeks later, the ethics board announced Pierce's license suspension pending investigation. It wasn't revenge, it was procedure. Vanessa started court-mandated counseling, not with someone she could influence, with someone neutral. The house felt different. Not lighter, just honest. I left the hallway camera where it was, not out of suspicion, but as a reminder. Truth doesn't shout. It waits, quietly, patiently, and when it's time, it plays. 3 months after the ruling, I ran into Vanessa at a school event. She looked composed, measured, different. We spoke briefly, civil, careful. She didn't apologize. I didn't ask for one. Some wounds don't need language. They need distance. That night, I stood alone in the living room. The red camera light blinked steadily. I walked over, and for the first time since this began, I turned it off. Not because I had something to hide, but because I didn't need proof anymore. The truth had already spoken, and this time, the court heard it.